I stood in the oak-paneled study of my father's estate, watching the lawyer shuffle through papers while my stepsister Amelia dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. My father's portrait loomed above the fireplace, his stern gaze, following me even in death, a constant reminder that I was never the daughter he wanted. The last words he ever said to me echoed in my mind. "You never deserved anything, Tia." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days dead, and he was still finding ways to hurt me. The reading of the will was a formality. I already knew what it would say. Who would get the family business, the mansion, the summer house in Maine, the classic car collection? It wouldn't be me. It never was. Still, something made me show up. Perhaps the last foolish hope that my father might have had a change of heart in his final moments. That perhaps somewhere beneath his cold exterior, he had loved me after all. As per the last testament of Oliver Montgomery, the lawyer, Mr. Harrington began, clearing his throat as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. I, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including Montgomery investments, all properties, vehicles, and financial holdings to my daughter, Amelia Montgomery. Amelia clutched her husband Denny's hand, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his skin as she feigned shock. The theatrical gasp she let out might have won her an Oscar if anyone had been fooled. I wasn't. Neither was my Aunt Clara, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat beside me, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. And to my biological daughter, Tia, Mr. Harrington continued, his voice faltering slightly as he read the next line. I leave only this, the knowledge that you never measured up. You chose your own path against my wishes, and now you must live with those choices. You never deserved anything from me. The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, some pitying, others simply curious to see how I would react to such a public humiliation. Even Mr. Harrington seemed uncomfortable, clearing his throat again as he struggled to maintain his professional composure. Is that all? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. 29 years of emotional abuse had taught me how to hide my pain well. I'm afraid so, Ms. Montgomery, he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. There's nothing else. Amelia's lips curled into the slightest smirk, so brief anyone else might have missed it. But I caught it. I'd been catching those smirks for 15 years, ever since my father brought home his much younger wife and her 7-year-old daughter. The daughter who somehow managed to become everything I wasn't in my father's eyes: obedient, business-minded, and most importantly, willing to be molded into his image. Well, I said, rising from my seat and smoothing down my simple black dress. Not designer like Amelia's, but dignified nonetheless. I can't say I'm surprised. Oh, Tia, Amelia cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy as she stood and took a step toward me. I know this must be so difficult for you. If there's anything I can do— There isn't, I cut her off, maintaining eye contact until she was the one who looked away. For all her bravado, Amelia had always been a coward at heart. Congratulations on your inheritance. I turned to leave, my low heels clicking against the hardwood floors my father had imported from some exotic location at an exorbitant cost. Always one for appearances, Oliver Montgomery. Even the floors beneath our feet had to speak of wealth and status. Tia, wait, my Aunt Clara called, hurrying after me as I reached the foyer. She had been my mother's only sister, and after Mom died when I was 12, Clara had been the only maternal figure in my life. Don't leave like this. We should talk. There's nothing to talk about, Aunt Clara, I said, pausing at the massive front door. We both knew this was coming. Clara glanced over her shoulder to ensure we weren't overheard. Your father wasn't always like this, Tia. After your mother died, something broke in him. And when he met Valerie and brought her and Amelia into your lives, well, things changed. But this, she gestured vaguely back toward the study, this is beyond cruel. You're his flesh and blood. I smiled sadly. Blood didn't matter to him, Clara. Only obedience did. My aunt pressed her lips together, then reached into her purse. Here, she said, pressing a small key into my palm. Your mother left this with me before she died. It opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. She made me promise not to give it to you until after your father was gone. I think she knew, somehow, that it would come to this. I stared at the key, a small, unremarkable thing that suddenly felt heavy with possibilities. What's in it? I don't know, Clara admitted. I kept my promise to her all these years. Whatever it is, it's yours now. From the study, I could hear Amelia's voice rising in excitement as she discussed what changes she planned to make to the house with Denny. Not even waiting for my father's body to be cold in the ground before redecorating. Typical. Thank you, I said, pocketing the key and giving my aunt a brief hug. I should go. As I stepped out onto the sweeping driveway, I took one last look at the Montgomery estate, the manicured lawns, the fountain that had been imported piece by piece from Italy, the 6-car garage housing vehicles my father had collected but rarely drove. None of it had ever truly felt like home. My modest Toyota looked out of place among the luxury vehicles of the other mourners. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in, my father's final insult from beyond the grave, a lifetime of disapproval culminating in one last public rejection. I started the engine and pulled away, watching the house grow smaller in my rearview mirror. The numbness I felt was familiar, a protective mechanism I'd developed years ago. But beneath it, something else was stirring, something that felt strangely like relief, mixed with a spark of determination? As I turned onto the main road, I realized I was smiling. Not the practiced, polite smile I'd perfected for family gatherings and corporate events. A real smile. Because for the first time in my life, I was truly free of Oliver, Montgomery's expectations and disappointments. Free to be myself without his shadow looming over me. And I had a key to something my mother had left for me. Something she'd kept hidden from my father. Something she'd wanted me to have only when he could no longer interfere. I headed toward downtown, toward First National Bank and whatever waited for me there. I didn't know what my mother had left behind, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the weight of my father's rejection began to lift, it was replaced by something lighter, something that felt almost like anticipation. Amelia thought she had won. My father thought he'd had the last word. They were both about to discover how wrong they were. I sat in my car in the First National Bank parking lot, staring at the small key in my palm. Whatever my mother had left for me had waited 15 years. It could wait another day. I needed time to process everything that had happened. Time to breathe. Instead, I drove to the only place that had ever felt like home. Cafe Meridian, AI, small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a vintage record shop downtown. I'd discovered it during my second year of college, when I'd chosen the state university instead of my father's alma mater, earning his everlasting disappointment in the process. "Tia!" Nikki called out as the bell above the door announced my arrival. She wiped her hands on her apron and came around the counter to give me a hug. "I heard about your dad. I'm so sorry." Nikki Harris had been my best friend since college. She'd opened the cafe 5 years ago with a small business loan and sheer determination, turning it into one of the most beloved spots in the city. Unlike my father, I'd supported her dream, helping her decorate and even covering shifts when she was short-staffed. She was as close to family as anyone could be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thanks, I said, grateful for her warmth but uncomfortable with the sympathy. I'm fine, really. Sure you are, Nikki replied, seeing through me as she always did. She led me to my usual corner table, already bringing over a cup of my regular oat milk latte with an extra shot. I'm assuming it went exactly as expected? Nodded, taking a grateful sip. Everything to Amelia, but that's not the interesting part. I pulled out the key and placed it on the table between us. Nikki raised an eyebrow. What's this? Something from my mother, apparently. Aunt Clara's been keeping it for me all these years? Well, what are you waiting for? Let's go see what it is. I shook my head. Not today. Today I just want to sit here, drink coffee, and pretend none of this is happening. Nikki studied me for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But tomorrow, we're going to that bank together. Okay. Deal. As Nikki returned to the counter to help another customer, I pulled out my laptop and opened my emails. I had 3 new freelance project inquiries, a logo redesign for a local restaurant, a complete branding package for a startup, and a website overhaul for a nonprofit. My graphic design business was growing steadily, despite my father's prediction that I'd be begging to work for Montgomery Investments within a year. 5 years later, I was still proving him wrong. Not that he'd ever acknowledged it. I'd just started drafting a response to the nonprofit when my phone buzzed. Calvin Matthews, my ex, or more accurately, the man my father had effectively driven away. Hey, I answered, surprised to hear from him. What's up? I just heard about your dad, Calvin said, his deep voice bringing back a flood of memories. Are you okay? Calvin had been a talented architect with his own vision, another quality my father couldn't tolerate. After a year of subtle undermining, and not so subtle criticisms, Calvin had accepted a position in Seattle. He'd asked me to come with him. I had almost said yes. I'm fine, I replied, the familiar response automatic by now. It's been expected. Let me guess, Amelia got everything? How'd you know? I asked, a small smile forming despite myself. Because your father was nothing if not consistent in his favoritism. Calvin paused. I'm back in town, you know. For good. Transferred back to the home office last month. My heart skipped a beat, which I immediately tried to ignore. Oh, that's nice. Maybe we could catch up sometime? No pressure, just coffee? Through the window, I could see people hurrying past, wrapped up in their own lives and problems. Normal people with normal families, who hadn't spent their lives trying to earn a father's love that was never going to be given. I'd like that, I found myself saying. How about this weekend? Perfect, I'll text you. And Tia? I really am sorry about your dad, despite everything. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Calvin coming back right now felt like the universe was playing some kind of joke. But maybe it was just a coincidence. Or maybe, now that my father was gone, things that had been pushed away had space to return. My thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the counter. I looked up to see a tall, impeccably dressed woman with a dissatisfied expression speaking sharply to Nikki. Even from behind, I recognized her immediately. Valerie Montgomery, my stepmother. I considered ducking out the back, but before I could move, she turned and spotted me. Her surprise quickly morphed into a practiced smile as she approached my table. Tia, darling, what a coincidence. Is it? I asked, not bothering to stand or offer her a seat. Valerie had never been warm to me, even before she'd succeeded in turning my father completely against me. She sat down anyway, setting her untouched latte on the table. I wanted to talk to you after the reading, but you left so quickly. I didn't think we had anything to talk about. Valerie sighed, removing her designer sunglasses to reveal eyes that looked suspiciously uncried. I know things between us haven't always been easy, but I want you to know that I tried to convince your father to be fair in his will. I nearly choked on my coffee. Fair? By leaving me nothing but a final insult? Oliver was set in his ways, she said, as if that excused everything. But Amelia and I have discussed it, and we'd like to offer you something. A gesture of goodwill. I waited, curious despite myself. A position at Montgomery Investments. Senior graphic, designer for the marketing department. It's a generous salary, and it would keep you connected to your father's legacy. I stared at her, trying to process what she was offering. A job. At my father's company. Under Amelia's control. Why? I finally asked. Valerie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Family should stick together, don't you think? Despite Oliver's feelings, you are still a Montgomery. I thought about the life I'd built for myself, the clients who valued my work, the freedom I'd fought for. I thought about answering to Amelia, about sitting in meetings where everyone knew I was only there because of pity. I'll think about it, I lied. Wonderful. Valerie stood, apparently satisfied with having done her duty. Call Amelia when you've decided. She's taking over as CEO immediately. As she headed for the door, I called after her. Valerie, does Amelia know you're making this offer? She paused, her back stiffening slightly before she turned with another practiced smile. Of course, dear. It was practically her idea. The lie was so obvious it was almost laughable. I wondered what Valerie was playing at. She'd never shown any interest in my welfare before. Whatever her game was, I wanted no part of it. After she left, Nikki returned to my table. What did the wicked stepmother want? To offer me a job, apparently? Nikki's eyebrows shot up. At Montgomery Investments? Seriously? What are you going to do? I closed my laptop, suddenly eager to get to the bank and discover what my mother had left for me. Something told me I'd need whatever it was to face whatever game Valerie and Amelia were playing. First, I said, gathering my things, I'm going to find out what's in that safety deposit box. Then, I'm going to do what I've always done, prove them wrong. The next morning, Nikki met me outside First National Bank 15 minutes before. They opened. She handed me a coffee, my usual order, and squeezed my arm supportively. Ready to find out what your mom left you? I nodded, clutching the small key so tightly it was leaving an impression in my palm. As ready as I'll ever be. As we waited, a sleek black Range Rover pulled up to the curb. The driver's door opened, and Amelia stepped out, dressed in what I recognized as one of my father's favorite power looks, a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore the pearl earrings my father had given her for her 21st birthday. She spotted us and paused, surprise briefly crossing her face before her practiced smile appeared. Tia, what a coincidence running into you here. Is it? I echoed the same response I'd given Valerie the day before. I have a meeting with the bank president, she explained, straightening her already perfect jacket. Now that I'm taking over Montgomery Investments, there are so many financial details to arrange, I'm sure, I replied flatly. Amelia's gaze flickered to Nikki, then back to me. Did Valerie speak with you yesterday? About the position? She did. And? I'm considering it. Amelia nodded, satisfied. Good. Family should be together in business. That's what Dad always said. She checked her watch, a platinum Rolex that had been our father's. I should get going. I have meetings all day. The transition has been overwhelming. As she walked past us toward the bank entrance, her perfume, the same expensive brand my father always bought for her, lingered in the air. Amazing, Nikki muttered once Amelia was out of earshot. She's been in charge for what, a day? And she's already become your father. She's been preparing for this her entire life, I said, watching Amelia greet the bank manager with the same firm handshake my father had perfected. Being Oliver Montgomery 2.0 was her entire purpose. When the bank officially opened, we were directed to a private room where a bank employee brought the safety deposit box. He left us alone, and I sat staring at the rectangular metal container, suddenly hesitant. "What if it's empty?" I asked. "What if she just left a note saying she's sorry for leaving me with him?" Nikki put her hand over mine. "Only one way to find out." Taking a deep breath, I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open. Inside was a manila envelope, a small velvet jewelry box, and a USB drive. I reached for the envelope first, recognizing my mother's handwriting on the front. "For Tia, when the time is right." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, the paper yellowed with age, and several legal documents. "My dearest Tia, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your father has finally revealed his true nature to you completely. I always hoped he would change, that he would see the remarkable person you are. But I've prepared for the possibility that he never will. What you need to know is that Montgomery Investments wasn't solely your father's creation. It was built with my family's money that came from my grandfather's patents. The original investment contract stipulated that half the company would always belong to my bloodline, meaning you, Tia. Your father convinced me to revise our wills when you were young, telling me it was just a formality, but I always kept copies of the original documents, which I've included here. The USB drive contains all the financial records and the original investment agreements, backed up and protected. He cannot legally disinherit you from your share of Montgomery Investments. It was never his to give away entirely. I'm sorry I won't be there to protect you from his disappointment. I'm sorry I won't see the amazing woman I know you'll become. But I hope these documents will give you the security and freedom to live your life on your own terms. All my love." Mom, I stared at the letter, then at the legal documents. The original investment agreement from my maternal great-grandfather, the company formation papers listing both my parents as equal founders, and a trust document naming me as the inheritor of my mother's shares. "Holy shit," Nikki whispered, reading over my shoulder. "You own half the company." "If these documents are still valid," I said, trying to process this revelation. It's been 15 years, and my father clearly thought he'd changed everything. I opened the velvet box next. Inside was a ring I remembered from my childhood, my mother's emerald engagement ring. Not the diamond my father had later replaced it with, claiming the emerald wasn't prestigious enough for his wife, but the original one she'd loved, with its deep green stone set in delicate gold filigree. She kept it, I whispered, slipping it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. As I gathered everything back into the safety deposit box, my mind was racing. If what my mother had left was legitimate, then Amelia didn't own everything. I had a claim to half of Montgomery Investments, a company now worth billions. But that raised an important question. Had my father known about these documents? Had he deliberately tried to erase my claim, or had he simply forgotten the original agreement? The answer came as we were leaving the bank. Through the glass doors of a conference room, I spotted Amelia sitting across from the bank president, Valerie at her side. They were reviewing documents, and even from a distance, I could see Amelia's confident smile. The look of someone who believed they held all the cards. "They know," I said to Nikki as we hurried past. "They have to know. Why else would Valerie suddenly offer me a position right after the will reading?" "To keep you close," Nikki agreed. "To make you feel included without actually giving you anything. They're afraid I'll find out. And now you have." As we stepped outside into the bright morning sunshine, I felt a strange sense of calm. For years, I'd tried to earn my father's approval, bending myself into shapes that never quite fit his expectations. I'd pursued my own path not out of rebellion, but because it was the only way I could breathe. And now, I discovered that what he'd withheld from me, acceptance, recognition, my rightful place, had never been entirely his to give or take away. "What are you going to do Nikki asked as we walked to our cars. I thought about Amelia in her perfect suit, wearing our father's watch, sitting in the seat of power she believed was hers alone. I thought about Valerie's condescending offer of employment, designed to keep me under their thumb. First, I said, I'm going to call a lawyer. A good one, who isn't connected to my father's firm. And then, I smiled, feeling the weight of my mother's ring on my finger, a talisman of strength I never knew I had. Then I'm going to have coffee with Calvin. And after that, well, Amelia's always underestimated me. It's time she learned what a mistake that was. For the first time since my father's death, perhaps for the first time in years, I felt something like hope. Not the desperate hope that someday he might approve of me, but something stronger. The certainty that I was my mother's daughter too, and that legacy was just as powerful. Whatever came next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. And I wouldn't be facing it unprepared. I sat across from Hank Thornton, the lawyer Nikki had recommended. His office wasn't in a gleaming downtown high-rise like my father's attorney's. Instead, it occupied the renovated second floor of a historic building, with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking a tree-lined street. So, Hank said, leaning back in his chair after reviewing the documents I'd brought. These are significant. Are they valid? I asked, getting straight to the point. It's been 15 years since my mother died. Hank removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully before responding. Based on my initial review, yes. The original agreement establishing Montgomery Investments clearly states that your mother's family provided the initial capital. The company was formed with the explicit condition that her bloodline, meaning you, would retain 50% ownership. But my father's will can't override this agreement. Hank finished for me. Your father could only bequeath what was legally his. Based on these documents, that's only half of Montgomery Investments. I exhaled slowly, still struggling to process the implications. Why wouldn't he have told me this? Or Amelia? Perhaps he thought the original agreement had been successfully amended, Hank suggested. Or perhaps he knew the truth but chose to ignore it, assuming you would never discover these documents. What do I do now? Hank steepled his fingers. Legally, you have several options. We could file a formal challenge to the will, citing these documents. That would trigger a court battle, lengthy, public, and potentially messy. Or we could approach your stepsister and stepmother directly, present the evidence, and negotiate a settlement that acknowledges your rightful ownership. The thought of sitting across a conference table from Amelia and Valerie, watching their faces as they realized their perfect inheritance was crumbling, was admittedly tempting. But something held me back. I need time to think, I said finally. This is a lot to process. Hank nodded sympathetically. Take all the time you need. These documents have waited 15 years. They can wait a little longer. As I left Hank's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Calvin. Still on for coffee tomorrow? 2 p.m. at Lighthouse Cafe? I smiled despite the whirlwind of emotions. See you there. The next day, I deliberately arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, wanting a moment to collect my thoughts before seeing Calvin again. The Lighthouse Cafe was our old favorite spot, a quirky place with mismatched furniture and local art covering every inch of wall space. I was surprised to find Calvin already there, sitting at our old corner table with 2 steaming mugs. He stood when he saw me, and I was struck by how little he'd changed in the 3 years since he'd left. The same warm brown eyes, the same slightly crooked smile, the same way of running his hand through his dark hair when he was nervous, which he was doing now. You remembered my order, I said, nodding to the chai latte with an extra shot of espresso sitting across from him. Some things you don't forget, he replied, pulling out my chair. For a moment, we sat in awkward silence, the weight of our history and 3 years of separation hanging between us. I'm sorry about your father, Calvin finally said. Despite everything. Thank you, I replied automatically. But honestly, I'm not here to talk about him. Calvin's shoulders relaxed slightly. Good. I'd rather talk about you. How you've been, what you've been up to. Your business is doing well? It is, I admitted. Better than even I expected. I'm not surprised, Calvin said. You were always the most talented designer I knew. Your father never gave you enough credit. I took a sip of my latte to hide my reaction. Even after all this time, Calvin's unwavering belief in me still had the power to touch something deep inside. What about you? I asked. Why did you come back? Officially? I'm heading up the new sustainable design division for the firm. And unofficially? Calvin's gaze held mine. I missed home. I missed a lot of things. Before I could respond, the cafe door opened, and I froze as Amelia walked in. She wasn't alone. My father's longtime business associate, Ken Taylor, was with her. They were deep in conversation, Ken nodding seriously as Amelia gesticulated, with the precise, controlled movements she'd copied from our father. That's your stepsister, right? Calvin asked, following my gaze. Yes, I confirmed, shrinking slightly in my seat, hoping they wouldn't notice us. No such luck. Amelia spotted me almost immediately, her eyes narrowing briefly before her face, arranged itself into a pleasant expression. She said something to Ken, then made her way to our table. Tia. What a lovely coincidence, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't find it lovely at all. Twice in 2 days? I remarked. Almost like you're following me. Amelia's smile tightened. Don't be ridiculous. Her gaze shifted to Calvin, and recognition flickered across her face. Mr. Matthews, I didn't realize you were back in town. Recently returned, Calvin confirmed coolly. He had never bothered to hide his dislike of Amelia or my father. How nice, Amelia said, clearly thinking it was anything but. She turned back to me. Have you given any more thought to Valerie's offer? The position is still open, but we're interviewing other candidates next week. I'm still considering it, I lied. Amelia nodded, satisfied. Good. We're having a board meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the transition. Perhaps you'd like to attend. As a gesture of goodwill. I knew what she was doing. Keeping me close, making me feel included without actually giving me any power. The same tactic my father had used countless times. I'll check my schedule, I said non-committally. Wonderful. 9 a.m., the main conference room. She glanced at her watch. I should get back to Ken. We're discussing some sensitive business matters. She gave Calvin a dismissive look. Nice seeing you again, Mr. Matthews. After she left, Calvin let out a low whistle. She hasn't changed a bit. Still thinks she owns the world. She thinks she owns Montgomery Investments, at least, I said, watching Amelia return to Ken, their heads bent close together. What did she mean about a position? Are you considering working for the family company? I hesitated, then made a decision. Calvin had always been my confidant, the one person who truly understood my complicated relationship with my father. If I couldn't trust him, who could I trust? No, I said firmly. I'm considering claiming my rightful half of it. Calvin's eyebrows shot up. Your half? Quickly, I told him about the safety deposit box, my mother's letter, and the documents that proved I owned 50% of Montgomery Investments. That's huge, Calvin said when I finished. What are you going to do? I thought about Amelia's invitation to the board meeting, a meeting where they would be discussing the transition of power, a meeting she clearly didn't expect me to attend, or she wouldn't have invited me so casually. I think, I said slowly, a plan forming in my mind. I'm going to attend that board meeting tomorrow, but not as the disowned daughter they can buy off with a middle management position. Calvin's slow smile matched my growing determination. Then who will you be attending as? I twisted my mother's emerald ring on my finger, feeling its weight. The weight of her legacy, her foresight, her protection reaching out to me from beyond the grave. As Tia Montgomery, I said, 50% owner of Montgomery Investments. The decision crystallized something inside me, a resolve that had been building since I'd first read my mother's letter. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the money. It was about claiming what was rightfully mine, and in doing so, reclaiming the part of myself that had been slowly eroded by years of my father's disappointment. Tomorrow would change everything, and for once, I was ready. The Montgomery Investments. Headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming skyscraper downtown. I'd avoided the building for years, apart from the occasional obligation to attend a company holiday party or anniversary celebration. Each visit had been marked by my father's thinly veiled disappointment and Amelia's smug superiority. But today was different. Today, I chose to be here. I dressed deliberately, a charcoal gray suit similar to the one Amelia had worn at the bank, but paired with a vibrant emerald blouse that matched my mother's ring. Professional, but distinctly me. I'd spent the previous evening reviewing the company's recent financial reports and quarterly statements, preparing myself as thoroughly as possible. The security guard at the front desk did a double-take when I approached. "Ms. Montgomery," he said, surprise evident in his voice. I didn't know you were coming in today." "I'm attending the board meeting," I said calmly, holding out my hand for a visitor badge. He hesitated. "I don't have you on the list for today. Call Amelia," I suggested. She invited me herself. 5 minutes later, I was riding the elevator to the top floor, visitor badge clipped to my lapel. My heart was racing, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned that particular skill from years of enduring my father's criticism without revealing how deeply it wounded me. The elevator doors opened directly into the executive reception area, where Valerie was speaking with my father's longtime executive assistant, Diana. They both looked up, identical expressions of shock crossing their faces. "Tia," Valerie recovered first, her voice overly bright. "What a surprise." "Is it?" Amelia invited me to the board meeting yesterday. Valerie's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did she? How thoughtful of her. But I'm afraid the meeting is for board members and executive leadership only." "I'm aware of the protocol," I said, holding my ground. "I'd still like to attend." Diana glanced uncertainly between us. "The meeting is about to start, Mrs. Montgomery. Everyone's already in the conference room." "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting," I said, starting toward the boardroom before Valerie could object further. The Montgomery Investments boardroom was exactly as I remembered it. A vast space dominated by a polished mahogany table with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Family portraits lined one wall, generations of Montgomerys who had built and expanded the business. My father's portrait held the place of honor, recently draped with a black ribbon of mourning. Amelia sat at the head of the table in my father's chair. The board members, 7 older men and 2 women who had served the company for decades, were arranged around her. Ken Taylor sat at her right hand, the position of trusted advisor my father had always placed him in. The conversation halted abruptly as I entered, followed by a visibly flustered Valerie. "Tia," Amelia said, not quite concealing her annoyance. "I didn't realize you'd decided to join us." "You invited me?" I reminded her, taking the only empty seat, coincidentally or not, the furthest from Amelia. "Yes, well," she said, recovering quickly. "I'm pleased you're taking an interest in the family business. As I was saying before we were interrupted, the transition plan I've developed ensures continuity while allowing for strategic growth in our core sectors. For the next 30 minutes, I sat silently as Amelia outlined her vision for Montgomery Investments. A vision that sounded exactly like our father's, down to the same phrases and emphasis. The board members nodded approvingly, comfortable with the familiar approach. "Any questions?" Amelia concluded, her gaze sweeping the room but pointedly skipping over me. "I have one," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Amelia's smile tightened. "Of course, Tia. We value all perspectives, even from observers." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. I could feel the board members' attention shift. To me, curiosity mixed with dismissal. In their eyes, I was just Oliver Montgomery's rebellious daughter, the one who had rejected the family legacy. "In your transition plan," I began, "I didn't hear any mention of the original investment structure of Montgomery Investments. Specifically, the agreement that established equal ownership between our father and our mother's family trust." A puzzled silence fell over the room. Amelia's smile froze in place. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," she said carefully. "The founding documents," I clarified. "The ones that stipulate 50% ownership remains with my mother's bloodline." I paused, letting the words sink in. Meaning me. Ken Taylor leaned forward, frowning. "Ms. Montgomery, Montgomery Investments has always been your father's company. Your mother was involved only as his spouse." "That's not accurate," I replied, reaching into my briefcase for the copies of the documents Hank had prepared for me. "I have the original investment agreement right here, signed by both my parents and notarized. It clearly states that the initial capital came from my mother's family, with the explicit condition that her bloodline would retain half ownership in perpetuity." I slid the documents to the center of the table. The board members exchanged confused glances. "This is ridiculous," Amelia snapped, not even glancing at the papers. "If such an agreement existed, our father would have acknowledged it in his will, not if he believed it had been legally superseded," I said, "or if he deliberately chose to ignore it." Valerie, who had been standing by the door, moved to Amelia's side. "This is hardly the time or place for this discussion," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Perhaps we should adjourn and address Tia's concerns privately." But it was too late. Harold Green, the most senior board member and my father's oldest friend, had picked up the documents and was examining them carefully. "These appear authentic," he said slowly. "The signatures, the notary seal. I remember your mother's family had significant wealth from some patents. Oliver mentioned it once, years ago." "This is absurd," Amelia insisted, her composure beginning to crack. "These documents could be forgeries. We need our legal team to review them." "By all means," I agreed. "My lawyer has the originals ready for authentication. He's actually waiting downstairs." It was a bluff. Hank was at his office, ready to come if needed. But the effect was immediate. Amelia's face paled, and Valerie gripped the back of her chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Perhaps," Harold suggested, looking troubled, "we should take a brief recess to consider this new information." Amelia stood abruptly. "Fine. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. She fixed me with a cold stare. "Tia, a word in my office. Now." As we left the boardroom, I could hear the buzz of conversation erupting behind us. Board members who had barely acknowledged my existence were now discussing my claim with urgent concern. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone felt it. In the privacy of what had been my father's office, now cleared of his personal items and redecorated to Amelia's. "Sucks," my stepsister rounded on me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Claiming what's mine," I replied simply. "Nothing here is yours," she snarled. "Our father built this company from nothing." "With our mother's family money," I corrected her. "Something he apparently never told you." Amelia's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You really think you can walk in here after years of turning your back on this company and take half of everything? You know nothing about running a business like this." I know enough, I said, meeting her gaze. I know that the original agreement is legally binding. I know that half of Montgomery Investments belongs to me, regardless of what our father's will said. The door opened, and Valerie entered, closing it firmly behind her. Her usual polished exterior had given way to barely contained fury. "You ungrateful girl," she said, her voice low and venomous. "After everything your father did for you—" "What exactly did he do for me?" I interrupted. "Aside from making it clear I was a disappointment. From the day you and Amelia moved in?" A tense silence fell as we faced each other. The three women Oliver Montgomery had shaped in very different ways. For the first time, I wasn't backing down. "This isn't over," Amelia finally said. "Not by a long shot." "No," I agreed, moving toward the door. "It's just beginning." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of legal consultations and emergency meetings. Hank had arrived at Montgomery Investments within an hour of my call, armed with the original documents and a confidence that unnerved Amelia's hastily assembled legal team. By the end of the day, the company was in turmoil. The board had called an emergency session without either Amelia or me present, and rumors were flying through every department. I spent the night at Nikki's apartment, my own place suddenly feeling too exposed, too vulnerable to Amelia's potential retaliation. "I still can't believe you did it," Nikki said as we shared a bottle of wine on her balcony. "You actually walked into that boardroom and dropped the bomb." "I can hardly believe it myself," I admitted. But once I was there, seeing Amelia in our father's chair, acting like she owned everything, something just snapped. "Good," Nikki said firmly. "It's about time." My phone buzzed, Calvin checking. In. He'd been supportive throughout the day, offering to come over, but I'd asked for space to process everything. Still, his consistent messages of encouragement meant more than I wanted to admit. The following morning, Harold Green called me. "Directly, Ms. Montgomery, Tia," he began, his voice grave. "The board has reviewed the documents your attorney provided, and we've consulted with outside counsel." I held my breath, waiting. "The agreement appears to be binding," he continued. "Your mother's family trust did indeed provide the seed capital for Montgomery Investments, with the explicit condition that her bloodline, meaning you, would retain 50% ownership." Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a new anxiety. "What happens now?" "The board has called a special meeting for this afternoon. We would like both you and your stepsister to attend. There are matters that need to be addressed." I arrived at the Montgomery building 15 minutes early, once again clearing security with a visitor badge. This time, however, Diana met me at the elevator. "Ms. Montgomery," she said, her tone more respectful than yesterday. "The meeting has been moved to the executive conference room on the 47th floor. If you'll follow me." The executive conference room was smaller than the boardroom, more intimate. The entire board was already seated when I arrived, along with Hank and two other attorneys I didn't recognize. Notably absent were Amelia and Valerie. Harold rose to greet me. "Thank you for coming, Tia. Please, have a seat." I sat across from him, Hank at my side. "Where's Amelia?" "She'll be joining us shortly," Harold said, exchanging glances with the other board members. "But before she arrives, there's something we need to discuss with you privately." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" Harold nodded to one of the unknown attorneys who slid a folder across the table to me. "In reviewing the company records, we discovered something concerning." I opened the folder to find financial statements, transfer records, and corporate minutes, many with highlighted sections. "What am I looking at?" I asked, overwhelmed by the technical financial jargon. Hank leaned forward, scanning the documents. "If I'm reading this correctly, these appear to show unauthorized fund transfers from Montgomery Investments to offshore accounts." "Unauthorized by whom?" I asked. By the board, Harold said grimly. By anyone except your father and, more recently, Amelia. I looked up sharply. Are you saying they were embezzling from the company? Not exactly, the attorney clarified. The funds were being moved through a complex network of shell companies, eventually ending up in accounts controlled by your father. It appears he was systematically draining capital from the company for at least the past 8 years. But why? He owned half the company outright. We believe, Harold said carefully, that he was attempting to insulate these assets from any potential claim you might make. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He knew about the original agreement. He knew I had a claim to half the company. It appears so, Harold confirmed. And he was taking measures to ensure that if you ever discovered the truth, there would be less for you to claim. I sat back, stunned. All these years I'd believed my father had simply written me off, disappointed in my choices and focused entirely on Amelia. But the truth was far worse. He'd been actively working against me, hiding assets, preparing for the possibility that I might someday assert my rights. How much? I asked, my voice barely audible. At least 300 million, the attorney replied. Possibly more. We're still tracing the movements. The door opened, and Amelia entered with Valerie and Ken Taylor close behind. Amelia's usual composure was notably absent. Her face was drawn, her movements tense. What is this about? She demanded, taking in the scene before her. Why wasn't I informed about this meeting until 30 minutes ago? Please sit down, Amelia, Harold said, his tone leaving no room for argument. We have serious matters to discuss. Amelia reluctantly took a seat, as far from me as possible. Valerie remained standing, her hand on Amelia's shoulder in a protective gesture. The board has reviewed the documents Ms. Montgomery provided, Harold began. We've confirmed their authenticity and legal standing. Tia Montgomery is, indeed, the legal owner of 50% of Montgomery Investments, through her mother's family trust. Amelia's face hardened. That's impossible. My father— Your father was well aware of this agreement, Harold interrupted, pushing another copy of the folder toward her. And based on these financial records, he took deliberate steps to hide assets from the company in anticipation of this day. Amelia stared at the folder but didn't open it. I don't know what you're talking about. The offshore accounts, Amelia? Ken said, speaking for the first time. His expression was grim. The transfers that you've continued since your father's death. The blood drained from Amelia's face. Those were authorized transactions, for tax purposes. No, Harold said firmly. They were not authorized by the board, and they go well beyond any legitimate tax strategy. They constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, possibly even fraud. Valerie stepped forward. This is outrageous. Oliver built this company. With my mother's family money, I interjected. Money that came with conditions he apparently tried to circumvent by hiding assets. A heavy silence fell over the room. Amelia's eyes darted between the board members, searching for allies and finding none. What do you want? She finally asked, turning to me with naked hostility. Before I could answer, Harold spoke. The board has made a preliminary decision, subject to both of your approvals. He looked between Amelia and me. In light of these discoveries, we believe the only path forward is a complete restructuring of Montgomery Investments' leadership. Meaning what exactly? Amelia demanded. Meaning, Harold said carefully, that neither you nor Tia will serve as CEO at this time. What? Amelia's voice rose sharply. That position is mine. My father groomed me for it my entire life. And yet you continued his unauthorized financial activities, Harold pointed out. Activities that, if made public, could seriously damage the company's reputation and stock value. The board proposes, he continued, a co-chairmanship arrangement. Both of you will sit on the board as equal representatives of your respective ownership stakes. Operational control will temporarily pass to Ken Taylor as interim CEO, while we conduct a proper search for permanent leadership. This is a coup, Amelia spat. You can't do this. Actually, Hank interjected, with Ms. Montgomery controlling 50% of the company and the board's majority support, they absolutely can. Amelia turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. You did this. You destroyed everything my father built. No, I said quietly. I reclaimed what was rightfully mine. What he tried to take from me. Ms. Montgomery, Harold addressed Amelia, you have a choice. Accept the board's decision and work within the new structure, or face the possibility of more severe consequences should we choose to pursue an investigation into these financial irregularities. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Amelia's legal exposure was significant, something she clearly hadn't considered until this moment. Fine, she finally said, her voice cold. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. As she stormed out, Valerie trailing behind her, I felt no triumph, only a profound sense of clarity. My father's rejection hadn't been about my choices or my personality. It had been about control he feared losing if I ever discovered the truth about my inheritance, and now that I had, nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the board meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Press releases were carefully crafted, announcing a planned leadership transition at Montgomery Investments. The financial irregularities remained confidential, contained within a small circle of board members and attorneys. I found myself suddenly thrust into a corporate world I had deliberately avoided for years. There were meetings with department heads, strategy sessions, and endless financial briefings. Ken Taylor, as interim CEO, was professional but distant, clearly caught between his loyalty to my father and his duty to the company. By the end of the week, I was exhausted and overwhelmed. I sat in the small office that had been assigned to me, not the executive suite Amelia occupied, but a respectable space with a decent view, trying to make sense of the quarterly projections report. A knock at the door interrupted my concentration. Diana stood in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. Ms. Montgomery, your stepsister has requested a meeting with you. She's in her office now. I hesitated. Since the board's decision, Amelia and I had carefully avoided direct interaction, communicating through assistants and emails when necessary. Did she say what it's about? No, ma'am. Just that it's important and private. Curiosity won out over caution. Tell her I'll be there in 5 minutes. Amelia's office, my father's old domain, had been further transformed in the past week. All traces of Oliver Montgomery had been erased, replaced by Amelia's sleeker, more modern aesthetic. She sat behind the massive desk, typing furiously, on her laptop, and didn't look up when I entered. You wanted to see me? I prompted, remaining standing. Amelia finished whatever she was typing, then closed her laptop with deliberate slowness. Yes, please sit down. I took one of the chairs. Across from her, keeping my expression neutral. What's this about? I've been doing some thinking, she said, her tone businesslike. About our current situation and how we might move forward more productively. I'm listening. This arrangement, the co-chairmanship, is untenable. We both know it. The company needs clear leadership, not division at the top. I couldn't argue with that assessment. The past week had made it clear that Amelia and I had fundamentally different visions for Montgomery Investments. What are you suggesting? Amelia leaned forward. A buyout. I'll purchase your 50% stake in the company. You'll be extraordinarily wealthy, free to pursue your design career or whatever else interests you, and I'll have the clear leadership authority the company needs. I raised an eyebrow. And where would you get the money for such a buyout? The offshore accounts? A flash of anger crossed her face before she controlled it. That situation is being addressed. I have personal resources, and I can secure additional financing. You mean you have what our father left you in his will? I said. The will where he explicitly stated I deserve nothing. Business and personal feelings are separate matters, Amelia replied stiffly. This is a business proposal, nothing more. I studied her carefully. Despite her composed exterior, there was a desperation in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Amelia wasn't just making an offer. She was revealing how badly she wanted me gone. What's the rush? I asked. We've only been co-chairs for a week. The company is at a critical juncture, she said. The uncertainty about leadership is affecting stock prices, employee morale, client relationships. We need stability. Or you need control, I countered. The same control our father had, the control he groomed you for. Amelia's professional mask slipped slightly. I earned that control. I spent my entire life learning this business, preparing to lead it. While you were off pursuing your artistic dreams, I was here, working alongside Dad, earning his trust, earning my place, and helping him hide assets from me, I asked pointedly. Her eyes narrowed. I did what was necessary to protect the company. You mean to protect your inheritance? Is there a difference? She shot back. This company was his life, his legacy. And my mother's, I reminded her. Her family's money made it possible. We had reached an impasse, both of us aware that we were repeating arguments that had no resolution. After a moment, Amelia regained her composure. Think about my offer, she said. I'm prepared to be extremely generous. I stood up. I'll consider it. As I reached the door, Amelia spoke again. Tia, there's something you should know before you make your decision. I turned back. What? Dad was planning to groom you for leadership too once. After your mother died. He saw potential in you. Her voice was softer now, almost wistful. But then you started pushing back, rejecting his guidance, insisting on your own path. It broke something in him. I stared at her, trying to determine if this was manipulation or a genuine revelation. Why are you telling me this? Because you should understand what you're getting into if you stay, she said. This company was everything to him. It became everything to me too. But you've always had other passions, other dreams. Is this really the life you want? The constant pressure, the ruthless competition, the personal sacrifices. Her question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. The past week had been grueling, nothing like the creative freedom of my design work. Did I really want to tie myself to Montgomery Investments permanently? I need time to think, I said finally. Amelia nodded. Take the weekend. My offer stands until Monday morning. I left her office with my mind racing. Back in my own space, I called Hank immediately. She wants to buy me out, I explained after outlining Amelia's proposal. Is that something I should consider? It depends on what you want, Hank replied carefully. Financially, it could be extraordinarily beneficial, but once you sell, you'll have no further say in the company your mother helped build. After hanging up, I stared out the window at the city below. The rational choice seemed clear. Take the money, invest it wisely, and continue building my design business without the complication of Montgomery Investments. I'd be set for life, free from the corporate world I'd never wanted to join. And yet, something held me back. A sense that selling would mean surrendering to my father's judgment of me, confirming his belief that I wasn't worthy of the Montgomery legacy. I left the office early, needing space to think away from the corporate environment. Without conscious decision, I found myself driving to the cemetery where both my parents were buried. My father's grave was still fresh, the marble headstone newly installed beside my mother's weather-worn one. Oliver Montgomery, the inscription, read, visionary, leader, father. That last word caught in my throat. Father. He had been that, technically. But what kind of father deliberately hides assets from his daughter? What kind of father's last words are, You never deserved anything. I turned to my mother's grave, touching the cool stone gently. What would you want me to do? I whispered. No answer came, of course. But as I stood there, I remembered something. My mother had told me long ago, when I was struggling with a difficult choice as a child. The right path isn't always the easiest one, Tia, but it's the one that lets you look in the mirror and recognize yourself. By the time I left the cemetery, my decision was made. Not the easiest path, certainly, but the one that felt true to who I was, who I had become despite my father's rejection. I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first to Calvin, asking if he was free for dinner. The second to Hank, giving him clear instructions for Monday morning. I wasn't going to sell. I was going to stay and fight for my place at Montgomery Investments, not because I needed my father's approval or Amelia's acceptance, but because I had earned it, because it was mine by right, and because sometimes the best revenge isn't walking away. It's staying and changing everything. Dinner with Calvin that evening was exactly what I needed, a chance to step away from the corporate drama and gain perspective. We met at Riviera, a small Italian restaurant we'd frequented years ago, tucked away on a quiet side street. You look exhausted, Calvin said as we settled into our corner table. Is that your professional architect's assessment? I teased, grateful for his directness. No, that's my I've known you for 7 years assessment. He studied me carefully. The corporate world doesn't suit you. I sighed, taking a sip of the wine he'd ordered. He still remembered my preference for bold reds. Is it that obvious? Me? Yes. You've always been happiest when you're creating, not when you're sitting in meetings or analyzing spreadsheets. And yet here I am, co-chair of Montgomery Investments. I shook my head. It's not how I imagined my life would go. So why not take the buyout? Calvin asked. You said yourself it would be more than enough to set you up for life, let you focus on your design work. It's complicated, I admitted. Part of me wants to take the money and run, but another part doesn't want to give Amelia the satisfaction. I smiled ruefully. That's part of it, but it's more than that. I struggled to articulate the feeling that had been growing inside me. My entire life, my father made me feel like I wasn't enough. Not ambitious enough, not business-minded enough, not Montgomery enough. Taking the buyout feels like proving him right. Calvin reached across the table, covering my hand with his. Or it might be the ultimate proof that you're making choices for yourself, not for his approval. His touch was warm, familiar. I'd forgotten how easily he could see through me, challenge my thinking without making me feel judged. There's something else, I said quietly. Something I haven't told anyone except Nikki. I'm listening. I took a deep breath. When I was going through the documents my mother left, I found notes about the original vision for Montgomery Investments. It wasn't supposed to be just another soulless corporate entity. My mother's family had principles. They wanted to create a company that balanced profit with purpose. Calvin nodded encouragingly. What kind of purpose? Community investment, ethical business practices, environmental responsibility. All the things my father gradually stripped away as he grew more focused on the bottom line. I traced the rim of my wine glass, collecting my thoughts. After my mother died, he transformed the company into something she wouldn't recognize, something I don't think she would be proud of. And you want to change that, Calvin said. It wasn't a question. I feel like I owe it to her, I confessed. She protected my inheritance all these years. The least I can do is honor her original vision. Even if it means battling Amelia at every turn? Even then. Calvin squeezed my hand gently. Then you've made your decision. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in days. I guess I have. The conversation shifted to Calvin's work, his recent projects, the changes in the city since he'd been gone. For a few hours, I was just Tia again, not the newly minted co-chair of a billion-dollar company or Oliver Montgomery's disappointing daughter. As Calvin drove me home, a comfortable silence settled between us. Outside my apartment, he turned to me. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you're making the right choice. And not just because I never liked Amelia." I laughed. "Your dislike was always mutual." "I know." His expression grew more serious. "But seriously, Tia, don't let this become about proving something to your father or besting Amelia. Make it about what you want, what you believe in." I nodded, touched by his concern. "I'll try." "That's all anyone can do." He hesitated, then leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Good night, Tia." "Good night, Calvin." Inside my apartment, I found myself drawn to the small box of my mother's belongings that Aunt Clara had given me after the funeral. I'd barely looked through it at the time, too raw with grief to face the memories. Now I carefully removed each item: photographs, letters, a few pieces of jewelry. At the bottom was a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. Opening it, I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately, the elegant script that had signed countless permission slips and birthday cards throughout my childhood. The journal contained her thoughts, observations, and plans from the early days of Montgomery Investments. Reading it was like hearing her voice again after all these years, passionate, thoughtful, visionary. She wrote about the values that would guide the company, the impact she hoped it would have, the legacy she wanted to create for future generations. For me, Oliver worries too much about quarterly profits, she'd written in one entry. I keep reminding him that we're building something to last, not just to impress shareholders at the next meeting. We need to think beyond the numbers. Tia deserves to inherit more than just money. She deserves to inherit purpose. I traced the words with my fingertip, tears blurring my vision. All these years, I'd thought my father was disappointed in me for not being business-minded enough, for choosing creativity over corporate ambition. But reading my mother's words, I realized I might have been following her path all along without even knowing it. Another entry caught my eye, dated just months before her death. "Oliver and I disagreed again today about the West Ridge project. He wants to move forward despite the environmental concerns, says the profit margins justify it." I reminded him of our original mission, that Montgomery Investments would never sacrifice ethics for earnings. He accused me of being naive. Perhaps I am, but I'd rather be naive than compromise what I believe in. I hope Tia inherits my stubbornness, in this regard at least. I closed the journal, holding it against my chest. My mother had fought her own battles within the company she helped create, standing firm on principles even when my father pushed against them. After her death, with no one to oppose him, he had remade Montgomery Investments in his image. Ruthlessly efficient, morally flexible, profit-driven above all else. And then he had groomed Amelia to continue that legacy. Monday morning arrived, with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed deliberately in a tailored navy suit with a silk blouse in my mother's favorite shade of turquoise. Around my neck, I wore her pendant, a simple silver disc engraved with her family's motto, "Integrity before profit." When I arrived at Montgomery Investments, Hank was waiting in the lobby. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we rode the elevator. "Up. Once we start down this path, there's no easy way back." "I'm sure," I replied, my mother's journal safely tucked into my briefcase. It's time for Montgomery Investments to remember its roots. The boardroom was already full when we entered. Amelia sat at one end of the table, flanked by her attorneys. Her expression was smug, confident, clearly expecting me to accept her buyout offer. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, taking my seat at the opposite end. "Thank you all for coming." "I believe we know why we're here," Amelia said, nodding to her lead attorney. "Shall we proceed with the buyout agreement?" "Actually," I replied, "that's not why I called this meeting." Amelia's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" I'm not selling my shares, I said clearly. Not now, not ever. The confident expression dropped from Amelia's face. You can't be serious. We had an agreement. No, we didn't, I corrected her. You made an offer. I considered it, and I'm declining. This is absurd, she snapped. What do you possibly hope to gain by staying? You've made it abundantly clear you have no interest in this business. That's where you're wrong, I said, opening my briefcase and removing my mother's journal and a stack of documents Hank had prepared. I have every interest in this business, just not the way it's been run in recent years. I slid copies of the documents down the table, a comprehensive proposal for restructuring Montgomery Investments, returning it to the balanced approach my mother had envisioned. What is this? Amelia demanded, flipping through the pages with growing alarm. The future of Montgomery Investments, I replied simply. A return to its founding principles. And with that declaration, the battle lines were drawn. The Montgomery legacy was at stake, and this time, I was fighting for more than just my share. I was fighting for my mother's vision, for the company that should have been, and for the daughter who finally understood her own worth. The board meeting ended in a stalemate. My proposal, to redirect Montgomery Investments toward a more balanced approach that honored its founding principles, was met with skepticism from some board members and outright hostility from Amelia. But I had caught them off guard, and several directors seemed intrigued by the vision I'd presented, particularly Harold Green, who remembered the company's early days under both my parents' leadership. We'll need time to review this thoroughly, Harold had said, effectively tabling any immediate decision. This represents a significant strategic shift. Amelia had stormed out the moment the meeting adjourned, but not before fixing me with a look of pure venom. You have no idea what you've started, she'd hissed. Now, 3 days later, I sat in Nikki's cafe after hours, surrounded by spreadsheets, market research, and company archives. Calvin leaned against the counter, making fresh coffee, while Nikki and Aunt Clara helped sort through the mountain of information I'd gathered. The environmental initiatives alone would require a complete restructuring of at least 3 divisions, Nikki pointed out, reviewing my notes. Are you sure the board will go for this? They will if I can prove it's profitable, I replied. That's the key, showing that ethical business practices and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. Your mother always believed that, Aunt Clara said, looking up from the old company newsletter she was reviewing. She used to say that short-term profit at the expense of long-term sustainability was fool's gold. I smiled, grateful for Clara's presence. As my mother's sister, she was one of the few people who remembered the original vision for Montgomery Investments. The problem, Calvin said, setting down fresh mugs of coffee, is that Amelia isn't going to sit back and let you reshape the company. She's been raised to believe in Oliver's approach, maximize profits at all costs. I know, I sighed. And she has allies on the board, people who've benefited from my father's way of doing business. So what's your strategy? Nikki asked. You can't just present a vision and hope they embrace it. She was right. I needed more than idealism to win this fight. I needed a concrete plan, allies of my own, and leverage, something that would make the board take my proposals seriously. I need to start with small victories, I said, thinking aloud. Projects that demonstrate my approach can work without threatening the entire corporate structure at once. Like a proof of concept, Calvin nodded. Smart. I also need to understand where each board member stands, I continued. Who might support me? Who's firmly in Amelia's camp? Who could be persuaded? Harold Green seems sympathetic, Clara offered. He and your mother were always friendly. And Ken Taylor, I added. As interim CEO, his opinion carries significant weight. He's been professional with me so far, but I don't know where his true loyalties lie. What about the offshore accounts? Nikki asked. Could you use that as leverage? I shook my head. The board's keeping that quiet to protect the company's reputation. If it became public, it would hurt everyone, including me. So it's a standoff, Calvin observed. For now, I agreed. But Amelia has an advantage. She knows the company inside and out. I'm still playing catch-up. But you have advantages too, Clara said. Fresh perspective, your mother's original vision, and skills your father never valued but might be exactly what the company needs now. I looked up, intrigued. What do you mean? Your design background, she explained. You understand how to communicate ideas visually, how to make complex concepts accessible. That's powerful, especially if you're trying to win people over to a new vision. She was right. My creative skills, the very talents my father had dismissed, might be my greatest asset in this battle. I have another advantage, I realized. Amelia expects me to play by my father's rules. Ruthless, underhanded, winner takes all. She's preparing for that kind of fight. But that's not your style, Nikki said. Exactly. If I approach this differently, it might throw her off balance. We worked late into the night, developing a strategic plan that would unfold in 3 phases. First, I would focus on building relationships with key players within the company, not just board members, but division heads, project managers, and influential employees. I needed to understand the organization from the ground up, not just from the boardroom down. Second, I would identify specific projects where my approach could demonstrate immediate value, initiatives that would showcase how ethical business practices could enhance, not hinder, profitability. Finally, and most importantly, I would reclaim my mother's legacy by uncovering and sharing the original Montgomery investment story, not as ancient history, but as a blueprint for the future. By the time we finished, it was past midnight. Nikki and Clara had gone home, leaving Calvin and me to pack up the remaining materials. This won't be easy, he said, helping me organize the folders into my briefcase. Amelia's had years to entrench herself in the company culture. I know, I admitted. But I have to try, not just for me, but for my mother, for what the company was supposed to be. Calvin's gaze was warm as he studied me. You've changed since all this began. You seem, I don't know, more centered somehow. I considered his observation. Maybe I am. For years, I defined myself in opposition to my father. Whatever he wanted, I chose the opposite. It was a kind of rebellion, but it was still letting him dictate my choices in a way. And now? Now I'm choosing my own path, I said, based on what I believe, not just reacting to him. Calvin smiled. I always knew you were extraordinary. Tia, I'm glad you're finally seeing it too. The next morning, I arrived at Montgomery Investments with renewed purpose. My first meeting was with the head of the marketing department, a division I'd specifically requested to review, given my background in design and communication. The department director, Marissa Jenkins, was initially wary. Ms. Montgomery, I want to be clear that our team has consistently met all performance metrics under Mr. Taylor's leadership. I'm sure you have, I assured her. I'm not here to criticize your work. I'm here to understand it better and potentially offer a different perspective. Gradually, Marissa relaxed as I asked thoughtful questions and shared ideas rather than criticisms. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, she was showing me projects in development and discussing challenges openly. You know, she said as we wrapped up, your approach is very different from what we're used to here. Different how? More collaborative, she said carefully. Usually, executives tell us what they want and expect immediate execution. You actually listened. That's how I've always worked with my design clients, I explained. The best results come from genuine partnership, not top-down directives. Marissa nodded, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. If you don't mind my saying, so, Ms. Montgomery, you're not what we expected. Call me Tia, I said, smiling, and I'll take that as a compliment. As I left the marketing department, I spotted Amelia watching from the hallway, her expression unreadable. When our eyes met, she didn't look away or pretend she hadn't been observing me. Instead, she offered a tight smile before turning sharply and walking in the opposite direction. The message was clear. She was monitoring my every move, assessing my strategy, preparing her counterattack. The game was on, and we both knew it. But while Amelia was playing to win at any cost, just as our father had taught her, I was playing to transform the very nature of the game itself, and that made me more dangerous than she could possibly imagine. 2 weeks into my new role at Montgomery Investments, I had established a routine. Mornings were dedicated to meetings with department heads and project teams, afternoons to reviewing financials and strategic documents, and evenings to working with Hank on my longer-term plans for the company. It was exhausting but necessary. I needed to understand every aspect of the business if I was going to effectively advocate for change. I was reviewing the quarterly reports for the international division when Diana knocked on my office door. "Montgomery," she said, her usual professional demeanor slightly ruffled. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent but won't give his name." Before I could respond, a man appeared behind her, middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair, and the rumpled appearance of someone who hadn't slept well. I recognized him immediately. James Weber, my father's former chief financial officer who had abruptly retired 3 years ago. "I'm sorry to barge in," James said, his voice low, "but we need to talk and it couldn't wait." Diana looked between us uncertainly. "Should I call security?" "No," I assured her. "It's fine. Mr. Weber is a former executive here. We'll speak privately." After Diana left, closing the door behind her, James sank into the chair across from my desk, looking relieved. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. "I wasn't sure I'd get past the front desk." "Why are you here, James?" I asked directly. "Last I heard, you'd moved to Arizona after your retirement." He gave a humorless laugh. "Retirement. That's what your father called it too. Made it sound like my choice." I studied him carefully. "It wasn't?" "No." James reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a flash drive, placing it on my desk. "I was forced out because I asked too many questions about certain financial irregularities." I stared at the flash drive. "The offshore accounts." James looked surprised. "You know about those?" "Some of it," I admitted. "The board discovered discrepancies after my father died. They've been investigating quietly." "Then you don't know the whole story," James said grimly. "Those accounts weren't just about hiding assets from potential claims. They were about hiding something much worse." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "Your father was involved in some—" James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Questionable business practices, specifically with the East Ridge Development Project in Southeast Asia." I vaguely recalled the project, a massive resort and residential development that had been one of my father's proudest achievements, despite controversy over its environmental impact. What kind of questionable practices? Bribes to local officials, falsified environmental impact studies, labor violations. James counted off the offenses on his fingers. I discovered the paper trail while reviewing the project financials. When I brought my concerns to your father, he made it clear I had 2 choices. Take an early retirement package with a generous non-disclosure agreement, or face legal consequences for mishandling company funds. "He threatened to frame you," I translated. James nodded. "I had a family, a mortgage, college tuitions to pay. I took the deal and kept quiet." "Until now," I observed. "Why come forward after all this time?" "Because when I heard that you were challenging Amelia for control of the company, I realized there might finally be a chance for things to change." He gestured to the flash drive. "Everything's there. Documents, emails, transfer records. I kept copies of everything, against the terms of my NDA." "That was risky," I remarked. "It was insurance," James corrected. "In case your father ever tried to renege on our agreement." I picked up the flash drive, turning it over in my hand. And Amelia? Was she involved in any of this? James shook his head. Not directly, not when I was there. But she was your father's protégé, learning his methods. I'd be surprised if she wasn't aware of at least some of his activities. Why bring this to me and not the authorities? Because this doesn't just implicate your father, James explained. It implicates Montgomery Investments as a corporate entity. If this became public, the company could face massive fines, lawsuits, even criminal charges. Thousands of innocent employees could lose their jobs. I hoped you might find a way to address the wrongdoing without destroying everything. His concern seemed genuine. Despite the risk he'd taken by keeping evidence and breaking his NDA, he still cared about the company and its people. I'll need time to review this, I said finally, and I'll need to consult with my attorney. James stood, visibly relieved. That's all I ask. Just be careful who you trust with this information. There are still people in the company who were complicit in these activities, people who would go to great lengths to keep it buried. After he left, I sat staring at the flash drive for a long time. The information it contained could be explosive, enough to destroy not just Amelia's position, but potentially the entire company. It had to be handled carefully. I called Hank, describing the situation without specifics. I need you to come to my office. There's something you need to see. While waiting for him, I couldn't resist taking a preliminary look at the files. I plugged the drive into my laptop, quickly scanning through the organized folders. James had been methodical. Each allegation was backed up with multiple forms of evidence, from emails to financial records to meeting notes. It was damning. One folder caught my attention, labeled simply Clara. Opening it, I found correspondence between my father and Aunt Clara dating back years. With growing unease, I opened the most recent email, sent just weeks before my father's death. Clara, your latest threat to expose the original investment agreement to Tia is noted. As I've told you repeatedly, that agreement was superseded legally years ago. Your continued attempts to intervene in my relationship with my daughter are unwelcome and potentially actionable. The monthly payments to your account will continue as agreed, provided you maintain your silence. Should you choose to disregard our arrangement, I'll be forced to take more drastic measures to protect my family's interests. This is my final warning on this matter. Oliver. I stared at the screen, struggling to process what I was reading. My father had been paying Aunt Clara to keep quiet about my inheritance, and she had been trying to tell me the truth, despite his threats. Why hadn't she mentioned this when she gave me the safety deposit box key? Why continue the pretense that she'd simply been honoring my mother's wishes? More importantly, had she known about the other questionable activities revealed in James's files? I was still grappling with these questions when Hank arrived. After reviewing the flash drive's contents for over an hour, his expression was grave. This is extensive, he said finally. And if authentic, extremely serious. We're talking potential. Violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, environmental regulations, labor laws, multiple jurisdictions, multiple offenses. Can we verify it's authentic? Some of it, yes. Financial records leave trails that can be confirmed. The emails would be harder to verify without access to the original servers. And if it is authentic? What are my options? Hank leaned back, considering. Legally, you have several. You could turn this over to the authorities, which would likely trigger criminal investigations. You could use it as leverage in your negotiations with the board and Amelia. Or you could attempt to address the issues internally, making restitution where possible without public disclosure. And my aunt's involvement? Complicated, Hank admitted. The emails suggest she was being paid for her silence, but also that she was attempting to defy your father by telling you the truth. We'd need to speak with her directly to understand her full role. I nodded, my mind racing. This evidence changed everything. Not just my strategy for dealing with Amelia, but my understanding of my family's history and the company my mother had helped build. "I need time to think," I said finally. "And I need to talk to Clara." "Be careful," Hank warned. "As James said, there could be others in the company with vested interests in keeping this information buried. The more people who know you have this, the greater the risk." As Hank left, I secured the flash drive in my desk safe and gathered my things to leave. The weight of what I'd discovered pressed down on me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my rightful place in the company anymore. It was about confronting decades of corruption, deceit, and moral failure, a rot that had spread from my father throughout the organization. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Aunt Clara, the one person I'd trusted completely throughout this ordeal. I needed answers from her, and I needed them now. As I headed for the elevator, my phone buzzed with a text from Calvin. "Dinner tonight? I could use a break from blueprints, and you probably need one from spreadsheets." I smiled despite my troubled thoughts. "Definitely. But I need to make a stop first. Can I meet you at 8? "I'll be waiting," he replied. I had no idea what Clara would tell me, or how it would change my path forward. But for the first time since this all began, I felt like I was finally uncovering the complete truth. Not just about Montgomery Investments, but about my family and the legacy I had inherited. The question now was what to do with that truth, and who would be left standing when it all came to light. I drove to Aunt Clara's house directly from the office, my mind swirling with questions. The modest 2-story home where she'd lived for as long as I could remember looked exactly the same as always. Well-maintained garden, warm porch light, wind chimes tinkling softly in the evening breeze. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful setting with the disturbing revelations about her relationship with my father. Clara opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for me. "Tia," she said, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. "Is everything all right?" "We need to talk," I replied, walking past her into the familiar living room lined with family photographs, many featuring my mother and me. Clara followed, her movements hesitant. "Would you like some tea? I just made a pot." "No," I said, turning to face her. "I want to know why my father was paying you to keep quiet about my inheritance, and why you didn't tell me about it when you gave me the safety deposit box key." All color drained from Clara's face. She sank onto the couch, suddenly looking every one of her 65 years. "How did you find out?" she asked quietly. "Does it matter?" I countered, remaining standing. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Clara sighed deeply. "Yes, but not until I was certain you were secure in your position at Montgomery. Not until Amelia couldn't hurt you anymore." "Explain," I demanded, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. Clara had been my rock, the one family member I trusted implicitly. Her betrayal, if that's what it was, cut deep. "After your mother died," Clara began, "Oliver changed. The grief twisted him somehow, made him harder, more obsessed with control. He started dismantling everything your mother had built into the company, the ethical guidelines, the community initiatives, the environmental protections." "And you knew about this?" "I was on the board back then," Clara reminded me. "I opposed him at every turn, but I was consistently outvoted. When I threatened to tell you about your inheritance once you were of age, he offered me a choice: accept monthly payments and stay silent, or be forced off the board and cut out of your life completely." "So you took the money," I said flatly. "I took the position it gave me," Clara corrected. "As long as I was on the board, I could at least try to mitigate some of Oliver's worst impulses. And more importantly, I could stay close to you." I paced the room, trying to process this information. "But you continued taking payments even after I was an adult, even after I could have fought for my rights." "Yes," Clara admitted, "because the timing wasn't right. You were building your own life, Your own career. Oliver was at the height of his power and influence. He would have crushed you, Tia. I've seen what he does to people who stand in his way. What does that mean? I asked sharply. What else do you know about his business practices? Clara looked away. Enough to know he operated in gray areas, sometimes darker. I didn't have proof, just suspicions and rumors. Whenever I pressed for details, I was shut out of meetings, denied access to information. Did you know about the East Ridge development? The bribes? The falsified environmental reports? She shook her head. Not the specifics, but I suspected something wasn't right with that project. The approvals came too quickly, the obstacles disappeared too easily. I studied my aunt carefully, trying to determine if she was telling the truth. Her eyes were tired but clear, her expression open. Why give me the key after he died? Why not just tell me everything then? Because I promised your mother, Clara said simply. She wanted you to discover the truth in your own time, to make your own decisions without being influenced by my feelings about Oliver. And, she hesitated, I was afraid. Of what? That you wouldn't understand, that you'd see only the money and think I'd betrayed you for it. Her voice cracked slightly. You're all the family I have left, Tia. I couldn't bear to lose you too. I sat down beside her, the anger draining out of me. I have evidence, I said quietly. Proof of what my father did. The offshore accounts, the bribes, all of it. James Weber brought it to me today. Clara's eyes widened. James? He swore he'd never speak of what he knew. He decided some things are more important than NDAs, I replied. Like making sure Montgomery Investments doesn't continue down the path my father set it on. What are you going to do with the information? Clara asked, concern evident in her voice. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I need allies, people I can trust completely. I thought you were one of them. I am, Clara insisted, taking my hand. I've always tried to protect you, even when I couldn't tell you the whole truth. Whatever you decide to do now, I'm with you. I wanted to believe her, and despite the initial shock of discovery, I found that I did. Clara had been caught in my father's web just as surely as I had been, making difficult choices in impossible situations. I need to know everything you know about the current board members, I said. Who might support ethical reforms? Who's firmly in Amelia's camp? Who might have been involved in my father's questionable decisions? Clara nodded eagerly. I can help with that. Harold Green is your strongest potential ally. He and your mother were close, and he's been uncomfortable with the company's direction for years. Patricia Winters and Michael Chen are swing votes. They prioritize stability but have expressed concerns about ethical issues in the past. As Clara continued outlining the power dynamics of the board, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The evidence James had provided was powerful, but wielding it effectively would require strategic alliances and careful timing. By the time I left Clara's house to meet Calvin for dinner, I had a clearer picture of the battlefield and potential allies. Clara had promised to arrange informal meetings with Harold Green and other sympathetic board members, creating opportunities for me to share my vision privately before bringing it to a formal vote. Calvin was waiting at Riverside Bistro when I arrived, his concerned expression softening as I approached. Rough day? He asked, standing to pull out my chair. Enlightening, I replied, ordering a glass of wine from the passing server. And complicated. Want to talk about it? I hesitated. Calvin had been supportive throughout this ordeal, but bringing him deeper into the web of corporate intrigue and potential legal issues felt unfair. On the other hand, I needed someone outside the situation to help me maintain perspective. I discovered some things about my father's business practices, I said carefully. Things that could potentially damage the company if they became public. Calvin listened attentively as I outlined the situation in general terms, without sharing. Specifics that might put him in a difficult position legally. Sounds like you're at a crossroads, he observed when I finished. Use this information as a weapon against Amelia, or try to address the underlying issues without destroying the company. Exactly, I sighed. The easy path would be leveraging this to force Amelia out. But that doesn't solve the deeper problems, the culture my father created, the ethical corners that were cut, the people who were hurt. What would your mother want you to do? Calvin asked gently. The question caught me off guard. Throughout this process, I'd been focused on reclaiming what was rightfully mine and standing up to the father who had rejected me. But Calvin was right. My mother's legacy was equally at stake. She'd want me to fix what's broken, I said slowly. Not just claim my share of ownership, but transform the company back into what it was meant to be. Then that's your answer, Calvin said. The question isn't whether to use this information, but how to use it to create lasting change rather than just winning a power struggle. As we continued our dinner, the outline of a plan began to form in my mind. I would need to build a coalition of allies within the company, not just board members, but department heads, project managers, and influential employees who shared my vision for a more ethical Montgomery Investments. With enough internal support, I could present both the evidence of past wrongdoing and a clear path forward, one that addressed the sins of the past while creating a better future. It wouldn't be easy, and Amelia would fight me every step of the way, but for the first time, I truly believed it was possible. Thank you, I told Calvin as he walked me to my car after dinner. For helping me see the bigger picture. That's what I've always loved about you, Tia, he said, his voice soft in the evening darkness. Even when you're fighting your own battles, you're thinking about something larger than yourself. As he leaned down to kiss my cheek, I turned slightly, and our lips met instead. The connection was brief but electric, a reminder of what we'd once shared and possibly could again. I should go, I said, taking a step back. Early meeting tomorrow? Calvin nodded, a half smile playing on his lips. We'll continue this conversation another time. Driving home, I felt a strange mix of emotions: determination about my path forward at Montgomery Investments, confusion about my rekindling feelings for Calvin, and a lingering sadness about the depth of my father's moral failures. But beneath it all was a growing certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Not because it would prove my father wrong or best Amelia, but because it was right, for the company, for the people who depended on it, and for myself. Tomorrow, I would begin building my alliance in earnest, and Amelia would soon discover that I was playing a very different game than she had anticipated. The opportunity to make my first significant move came sooner than expected. 2 days after my dinner with Calvin, Ken Taylor requested a private meeting in his office. I've been reviewing the proposed Wellington acquisition, he said without preamble as I took a seat. The board is expecting our recommendation next week. The Wellington Group was a mid-sized sustainable technology company that developed innovative environmental solutions. My father had initiated acquisition talks shortly before his death, seeing it as a lucrative opportunity to absorb their patents and client base. What are your thoughts? I asked, sensing Ken's hesitation. Financially, it makes sense, he admitted, sliding the proposal across his desk. Wellington's valuation is reasonable, and their tech portfolio would strengthen our position in emerging markets. But, I prompted. Ken sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. But the acquisition plan developed under your father's direction involves dismantling the company after purchase. Their research division would be absorbed, their manufacturing outsourced, and their workforce reduced by approximately 60%. Typical corporate streamlining, I observed, keeping my tone neutral. Yes, efficient and profitable, Ken agreed. Amelia is strongly in favor. I flipped through the detailed proposal, noting the cold precision of the planned dismantling. Wellington had been built over 30 years by a husband-wife team with a genuine commitment to environmental innovation. Their company culture emphasized research, sustainability, and employee well-being, values that would be sacrificed for Montgomery's bottom line under this plan. "What if there's another approach?" I suggested, an idea taking shape. Ken looked intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "Instead of gutting Wellington, we preserve their innovative culture and integrate it into Montgomery. Use their sustainability expertise to transform our own practices, rather than simply absorbing their patents. That would significantly reduce the immediate financial benefits of the acquisition," Ken pointed out. "In the short term, yes," I acknowledged. "But long term, we'd position Montgomery as a leader in sustainable business practices while still expanding our market reach. We'd gain not just Wellington's technology, but their reputation, their talent, and their vision." Ken studied me thoughtfully. "You sound like your mother." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said with a small smile. It was meant as one. He tapped the folder. "Draft an alternative proposal. I'll make sure it gets fair consideration alongside the original plan." I spent the weekend working with Nikki and Calvin to develop my alternative vision for the Wellington acquisition. Instead of focusing solely on financial projections, we created a comprehensive presentation that illustrated how preserving Wellington's core values could transform Montgomery's corporate culture and market position. By Monday morning, I had a compelling proposal backed by sound financial analysis. The key difference from my father's approach was perspective. His plan prioritized immediate profit, while mine balanced profit with long-term sustainability and ethical considerations. When I arrived at the executive meeting, Amelia was already there, surrounded by her usual allies. She barely glanced at me as I took my seat. Ken opened the meeting by summarizing both acquisition approaches, the original plan and my alternative. I could see surprise and irritation flash across Amelia's face when she realized I had developed a competing proposal. "This is irregular," she objected. "The original acquisition strategy was thoroughly vetted by our father's team. The board requested all viable options," Ken reminded her. "Ms. Montgomery's approach deserves equal consideration." When it was my turn to present, I focused on the practical benefits of my plan rather than its ethical superiority. I showed how preserving Wellington's innovative culture could give Montgomery access to emerging markets, enhance our corporate reputation, and provide sustainable growth. "This isn't just about doing good," I concluded. "It's about doing well by doing good. The business landscape is changing. Companies that ignore sustainability aren't just ethically compromised, they're strategically vulnerable." As I finished, I could see that I'd made an impact. Even Amelia's closest allies appeared thoughtful, considering the merits of my approach. "Thank you, Ms. Montgomery," Ken said. "We'll present both options to the board tomorrow for final decision." As the meeting adjourned, Harold Green approached me. "Impressive work," he said quietly. "Your mother would be proud." Amelia brushed past us, her expression thunderous. She hadn't expected me to challenge her on actual business strategy. She'd been prepared for a personal power struggle, not a battle of ideas. I had made my first major move, and it wasn't the one she had anticipated. The real fight for Montgomery Investments had begun. The board's decision came the following afternoon. After reviewing both acquisition proposals, they voted 6-3 in favor of my approach to the Wellington Group. It wasn't just a victory for my specific plan. It was a fundamental shift in the company's direction, the first tangible sign that change was possible. When the news spread through Montgomery Investments, I received surprised looks and cautious congratulations from employees who had never expected Oliver Montgomery's rebellious daughter to demonstrate genuine business acumen. Even Ken seemed impressed, nodding appreciatively when we passed in the hallway. I called Calvin first with the news, then Nikki. Both were delighted, but cautioned me that this was just the opening round. Amelia wouldn't take the defeat lying down. They were right. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find my security clearance restricted. I could no longer access certain financial systems or executive databases. "A system update," explained the apologetic IT specialist when I called to inquire. "Ms. Montgomery, that is your sister, ordered security protocols to be updated across all executive accounts." "Except hers, I'm guessing," I replied dryly. The IT specialist's uncomfortable silence was confirmation enough. It was a petty move, but effective. Without access to key data, my ability to develop and support future proposals would be severely hampered. Amelia was using her deeper knowledge of company systems and procedures to isolate me. I was contemplating my next move when Diana appeared at my door, looking anxious. "Ms. Montgomery, there's an urgent situation. The Wellington Group representatives are downstairs, demanding to speak with leadership immediately. Apparently they received some concerning information about the acquisition." I hurried to the main conference room, where I found Amelia already seated with Ken and Harold. Across the table sat Jacob and Eleanor Wellington, the company's founders, along with their legal counsel. Their expressions were grim. "What's going on?" I asked, taking the empty seat beside Harold. Eleanor Wellington, a distinguished woman in her early 60s, slid a folder across the table. "We received these documents anonymously this morning. They detail Montgomery Investments' involvement in the Eastridge development scandal, specifically the environmental violations and bribery of local officials." I felt the blood drain from my face as I recognized the documents. They were from James Weber's flash drive, information I had shared with no one except Hank and Clara. "These allegations raise serious concerns," Jacob Wellington continued. "Our company was founded on principles of environmental stewardship and ethical business practices. We cannot, in good conscience, proceed with an acquisition by a company with this history, regardless of how attractive the current proposal might be." Amelia's expression remained impassive, but I could see the triumph in her eyes. She had sabotaged the acquisition deliberately, preferring to destroy the deal entirely, rather than see my vision implemented. "Mr. and Mrs. Wellington," I said carefully, "I understand your concerns. These documents reflect past leadership decisions that do not represent the company's current direction or values." "Current direction?" Eleanor echoed skeptically. "Your father's approach to business is well documented, and from what we understand, your sister has been positioned as his successor and maintained his policies. Why should we believe anything has changed?" Before I could respond, Amelia interjected smoothly. "Mrs. Wellington, you're absolutely right to question our commitment to change. The truth is, Montgomery Investments has operated under certain pragmatic principles for decades. My sister's recent proposal represents her personal vision, not necessarily the company's established approach." Her message was clear. She was deliberately undermining the acquisition while making sure the Wellingtons saw her as the honest one and me as offering empty promises. "Perhaps," Ken suggested, "we could take a brief recess to discuss these concerns privately before continuing." The Wellingtons agreed, and as they stepped out with their attorney, I turned to Amelia. "You did this," I said quietly. "You leaked those documents to sabotage the deal. Prove it," she replied, her voice equally low. "Besides, I'm not the one who had access to damaging information about our father's business practices. That would be you, wouldn't it? Perhaps you should be more careful about what you share and with whom." The implication was clear. She knew about my meetings with James Weber and possibly even my conversations with Aunt Clara. The circle of people I could trust was shrinking rapidly. "This isn't over," I told her. "You're right," Amelia agreed, standing to leave. "It's just beginning. You won your little victory with the board, but I've spent years learning how this game is really played. You should ask yourself how much you're willing to lose to win." As she walked out, Harold gave me a sympathetic look. "The gloves are coming off," he observed. "Be careful, Tia. Your sister fights to win, regardless of the cost. I nodded, already, formulating my next move. Amelia had escalated from corporate maneuvering to outright sabotage. If I was going to save both the Wellington acquisition and my larger vision for Montgomery Investments, I would need to take risks I hadn't previously considered. The battle for my father's legacy had just become a war. I spent the next 2 days in damage control mode, working with Ken and Harold to salvage the Wellington acquisition. We managed to convince Jacob and Eleanor to postpone their decision, giving us time to demonstrate Montgomery's commitment to ethical reform. But Amelia's sabotage had done its work. The Wellingtons remained deeply skeptical. On Thursday morning, I arrived at the office to find an unusual number of employees gathered in the lobby, whispering amongst themselves. Conversations abruptly ceased when they noticed me, replaced by uncomfortable glances. "What's going on?" I asked Diana when I reached the executive floor. She handed me a tablet displaying the company-wide email that had been sent an hour earlier. It was from Amelia, announcing an emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning to address serious concerns about leadership stability and decision-making processes. "There's more," Diana said hesitantly. "The internal message boards are active this morning." I logged into the corporate intranet and immediately understood the whispers in the lobby. Somehow, personal details about my life had been posted anonymously. Everything from my college financial struggles to client disputes in my design business, to details about my breakup with Calvin. The posts stopped just short of outright defamation, but painted a picture of someone unstable, unreliable, and unfit for corporate leadership. The source was obvious. Only Amelia had both the motivation and the resources to dig into my past this way. She was undermining me publicly, trying to turn employees and board members against me before the emergency meeting. I was still processing this when my phone rang. Valerie, calling for the first time since the will reading. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Not at the office. Meet me at Riverside Park near the fountain in an hour." I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. "Fine. 1 hour." Valerie was already waiting when I arrived, elegant as always in a tailored pantsuit, sunglasses hiding her expression. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a secluded bench. "What do you want, Valerie?" I asked, remaining standing. She removed her sunglasses, revealing tired eyes. "To warn you, Amelia is planning something for tomorrow's board meeting, something that goes beyond normal corporate politics." I studied her skeptically. "Why would you tell me this? You've always supported her over me." "Because she's becoming exactly like your father in his final years," Valerie said quietly. "Obsessed with control, willing to destroy anyone who challenges her. It's concerning." "Concerning enough that you've switched sides?" "I haven't switched sides," Valerie corrected. "I'm trying to prevent a disaster. Amelia has obtained access to your personal financial records. She plans to present evidence to the board that you've been approaching Montgomery clients for your private design business, using your position for personal gain." I stared at her in shock. "That's completely false." "I know," Valerie surprised me by agreeing. "But she has documents that suggest otherwise. Emails, meeting records, client testimonials. They've been altered. She's fabricating evidence to get me removed," I realized, anger building. "And you're okay with this?" Valerie looked away. "I didn't know how far she would go until recently. Your father taught her to win at all costs, and she learned the lesson too well." "Why tell me now?" she hesitated. "Because despite everything, you're still Oliver's daughter, and what Amelia is doing, he wouldn't have wanted this." As Valerie walked away, I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow's board meeting would determine not just my future at Montgomery Investments, but the very soul of the company. The boardroom was packed the next morning. Every board member was present, along with key executives, Hank, and Amelia's legal team. The tension was palpable as I took my seat opposite Amelia, who couldn't quite hide her smug confidence. Harold called the meeting to order, his expression grave. Ms. Montgomery has requested this emergency session to address what she describes as serious concerns about company leadership. She has the floor. Amelia rose smoothly, distributing folders to each board member. Thank you, Harold. I regret the necessity of this meeting, but recent events have forced me to bring certain matters to the board's attention. She launched into a meticulously crafted presentation, outlining my supposed ethical breaches, specifically using my position at Montgomery to divert clients to my design business. The evidence appeared damning. Emails showing me discussing projects with Montgomery clients, meeting records indicating private consultations, even client testimonials confirming they'd been approached for outside work. While I understand the desire to maintain one's independent career, Amelia concluded, her voice dripping with false sympathy, such conflicts of interest cannot be tolerated at the executive level. I formally request that the board remove Tia Montgomery from her position as co-chair, effective immediately. All eyes turned to me. I had spent the night preparing for this moment, knowing that my response would determine everything. Before I address these allegations, I said calmly, I'd like to share something with the board. I connected my laptop to the presentation system and pulled up a video file, the recording I'd made of my conversation with Valerie in the park, captured by the recording app on my phone. This is a conversation I had yesterday with Valerie Montgomery, I explained. I think you'll find it illuminating. The room fell silent as Valerie's voice filled the space. Amelia has obtained access to your personal financial records. She plans to present evidence to the board that you've been approaching Montgomery clients for your private design business. They've been altered. Amelia's face drained of color. You can't. Inadmissible in court, perhaps, I acknowledged, but more than sufficient for this room. I turned to the board members. The documents you've been given are fabrications, created to remove me because I represent a different vision for Montgomery Investments than the one Amelia and my father embraced. I took a deep breath, knowing my next move was risky. But this goes beyond personal rivalry. It speaks to the fundamental character of this company and the legacy we choose to uphold. I connected a flash drive, a copy of James Weber's evidence, to my laptop. For too long, Montgomery Investments has operated in ethical gray areas. Under my father's leadership, and with Amelia's knowledge, the company engaged in practices that violated not just moral principles, but legal ones. Gasps filled the room as I displayed examples of the offshore accounts, the falsified environmental reports, the bribery evidence. This is the true Montgomery legacy, one of corruption, masked by success of profit at any cost. That's enough, Amelia shouted, standing abruptly. These are baseless accusations. They're documented facts, I countered. And they leave us with a choice. We can continue down this path, or we can change course. Not just superficially, but fundamentally. I looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. My mother helped found this company with a vision of ethical business practices that balanced profit with purpose. I'm asking you to help me restore that vision, not because it's morally right, though it is, but because it's the only sustainable path forward in today's business environment. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Harold spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I move that we adjourn to consider these matters in private executive session. Ms. Tia Montgomery and Ms. Amelia Montgomery will recuse themselves while the board deliberates. As Amelia and I left the boardroom, her mask of composure finally cracked. You've destroyed everything, she hissed. Are you happy now? I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Like me, she had been shaped by our father's expectations, molded to fit his vision of success. The difference was that I had eventually broken free, while she had become his perfect reflection. I didn't destroy anything, Amelia, I said quietly. I'm trying to rebuild something better. The board deliberated for nearly 5 hours. Amelia and I waited in separate offices, the tension stretching like an elastic band pulled to its breaking point. When Diana finally came to escort me back to the boardroom, her expression revealed nothing. All the board members looked exhausted, but resolute. Amelia was already seated, her face a careful mask of composure. Harold, as the most senior director, spoke first. After careful consideration of all evidence presented today, the board has reached several decisions. He unfolded a piece of paper. First, regarding the allegations against Tia Montgomery. We find no credible evidence of ethical breaches or conflicts of interest. These charges are dismissed. Amelia's fingers tightened around her pen, but she remained silent. Second, regarding the evidence of historical misconduct at Montgomery Investments. We acknowledge the seriousness of these issues and commit to a full internal investigation, with appropriate remedial actions to follow. Harold paused, his gaze moving between Amelia and me. Finally, regarding leadership, the co-chair arrangement has proven untenable. The board has concluded that Montgomery Investments requires a single, clear vision to move forward. My heart sank. Despite everything, Amelia's deeper knowledge of the company operations and her years of grooming by our father would likely tip the scales in her favor. Therefore, Harold continued, effective immediately, Amelia Montgomery will step down as co-chair and remain on the board as a director. Tia Montgomery will assume the position of CEO with a mandate to implement ethical reforms while maintaining profitability. The shock on Amelia's face mirrored my own. This is outrageous, she sputtered. I've dedicated my entire life to this company while she demonstrated the vision and ethical clarity this company needs, Ken interrupted firmly. The vote was 7-2, Amelia. It's done. 3 months later, I stood at the podium during Montgomery Investments' annual shareholder meeting presenting our new corporate direction. The room was packed with investors, employees, media, and special guests, including Jacob and Eleanor Wellington, whose company was now part of Montgomery through a revised acquisition that preserved their autonomy and ethical standards. In our first quarter under new leadership, I concluded, we've not only maintained profitability but improved our market position by embracing sustainability and ethical business practices. Montgomery Investments is entering a new era, one that honors our founding principles while embracing the challenges of the future. The applause was gratifying, but more meaningful was the pride I saw in Aunt Clara's eyes as she sat in the front row. Beside her sat Calvin, who had been my rock throughout the transition, offering perspective, support, and eventually love rekindled. After the presentation, I found a quiet moment alone in what had once been my father's office, now mine. I'd redecorated, removing the imposing mahogany desk and dark curtains, replacing them with a lighter, more collaborative space. But I'd kept one thing, a photograph of my mother that I'd found in her journal, showing her on the day Montgomery Investments was founded. She looked confident, visionary, her eyes bright with purpose. Ms. Montgomery? Diana called from the doorway. The Wellington team is ready for your meeting. Thank you, Diana. And please, it's still just Tia. As I gathered my notes, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Confident, centered, at peace. The journey to reclaim my inheritance had transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd started seeking justice for myself, but ended up finding purpose for many. My father's last words, "You never deserved anything," no longer held power over me. I knew the truth now. I had always deserved my place here, not because of birthright or legal documents, but because I carried the values that should have been Montgomery's all along. I wasn't just Oliver Montgomery's disappointing daughter anymore. I was my mother's daughter too, and finally, completely my own person, and that was the greatest inheritance of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.